Heaven was silent as the sons of God presented themselves before the Most High. Among them, a shadowy figure stood out, Satan, the adversary. He walked among the angels, his presence a disturbing contrast in the heavenly realm. Then the voice of God rang out, piercing and absolute. "Where do you come from?" Satan, with a cold smile, replied, "From going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it." It was a simple answer, but it was loaded with hidden intentions. He did not merely wander, he lurked, watched, looking for an opening, an opportunity to wreak havoc upon humanity. And God, knowing his cunning, challenged him with a question that changed the course of history. "Have you seen my servant Job? There is none like him in the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil." Satan's answer was full of irony and mockery. "Does Job fear God without cause? Have you not surrounded him and his house with protection? Have you not blessed the work of his hands and made his wealth increase? But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will blaspheme you." The challenge was thrown down. Satan was insinuating that Job's faithfulness was not the fruit of true love, but merely the result of the blessings he received. And God, knowing the depth of his servant's faith, allowed the test. "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." With an evil gleam in his eyes, Satan left. The storm was about to gather over Job, and he did not yet know that he would soon lose everything. His possessions, his servants, his children, everything would be taken from him. But what Satan did not expect was that, even amidst the ashes of misfortune, Job would remain steadfast. Imagine being at home, at peace, surrounded by your family and riches, believing that everything was in perfect harmony. Suddenly, a messenger arrives, panting, with wide eyes and a trembling voice. "The Sabaeans attacked and took all the oxen and donkeys. They killed the servants with the sword. I alone have escaped to tell the news." Before Job could process the shock, another messenger came running, covered in dust and despair. "Fire fell from the sky. It burned all the sheep and servants. I alone have escaped to tell the story." He had barely finished this sentence when a third man approached, almost stumbling with exhaustion. "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, attacked your camels, and killed the servants. I alone managed to escape to tell you." Job's mind was already in tatters, but the final blow came with the 4th and most devastating messenger. Tears streaming down his face and his voice breaking, he revealed, "Your sons and daughters were gathered in the house of their eldest brother. A strong wind came from the desert and blew the house down on them. They were all dead. I alone have escaped to tell the news." 4 fatal blows. 4 messengers brought destruction, one after the other, without giving Job time to breathe or comprehend the magnitude of the tragedy. In a matter of minutes, everything he owned, his possessions, servants, and family, was brutally ripped from his hands. But what makes this scene even more intriguing? None of these messengers knew about the others. They did not conspire to deliver the news in sequence. What seemed like a simple coincidence was, in fact, one of the greatest tests a human being has ever faced. And in the face of this absolute chaos, Job tore his clothes, prostrated himself on the ground, and worshipped God. The silence was deathly. The desert wind blew softly, stirring dust over the ruins of the house that until recently had echoed with laughter and song. Now, among the ruins, lay the bodies of 10 children, 10 lives torn away at once by the fury of fate. Job, a once prosperous man, now found himself facing the most devastating scene of his existence. His heart ached with an anguish that words could not describe. Each body he held was a piece of himself that was falling apart. The eldest son, who had always been his pride, the youngest daughter whose hands he had held as a child, all of them there, motionless, without the chance to say a final goodbye. How could he bear to bury 10 children at once? What father could find the strength to dig 10 graves in a row? Perhaps he whispered the names of each one, his voice choked, his eyes filled with uncontrollable tears. Each handful of earth that fell on the bodies was a blow to his soul. Job's friends, who would later accuse him, were absent at the time. His servants had been killed. His wife, consumed with grief, may not have had the strength to look at the scene. He was alone with his grief, faced with the relentless reality of loss. Heaven was once again the scene of a mysterious encounter. The sons of God presented themselves before the Most High, and among them, stealthy and full of hidden agendas, was Satan. He had already struck his first blow at Job, stealing everything from him, riches, servants, children. But now he returned with a new plan. God, with his voice that shook heaven and earth, asked again, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered indifferently, "From going to and fro in the earth." But God, knowing the heart of his servant, made sure to reiterate, "Have you seen my servant Job? He still maintains his integrity, even after all that you have taken from him." It was a blow to Satan's pride. He expected Job to have broken down, cursed God, given up. But Job remained faithful. Furious, Satan launched a new accusation. "Skin for skin. All that a man has he will give in exchange for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will blaspheme you." The strategy was clear. If the loss of his possessions and family was not enough to shake Job's faith, perhaps the physical pain would be. Satan knew that suffering in one's own body is one of the hardest burdens to bear, and so God allowed it. "Behold, he is in your power, but spare his life." The pain was already unbearable. Job had lost everything, wealth, servants, children, and yet he kept his faith. But Satan was not satisfied. He wanted to go further. What had once been a respected and admired man now became a repulsive being in the eyes of society. Job sat in ashes, isolated, like a true dying man awaiting death. He picked up a shard of tile to scrape his wounds, trying to relieve the infernal itch that would not cease. His days were filled with fever, pain, and weakness, his nights endless torment. The eyes that had once looked at him with admiration now looked away with revulsion. The servants who had served him faithfully were dead. The tragedy had struck Job like a furious storm. His children were dead, his possessions plundered, his body covered in repulsive sores. His wife, however, saw the scene with different eyes. She too had lost everything. Her children, who had once run wild in the house, now lay in the dust. Her once prosperous home had become a desert of silence and mourning. But what was eating away at her was not just the pain of loss, but the sight of her husband wasting away, clinging to a faith that no longer made sense to her. Then, unable to contain her anger, she approached and poured out sharp words on Job. "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." It was a cry of despair, a challenge to heaven. She no longer saw the purpose in resistance. Perhaps by cursing God, Job would find a quick end to his pain. Perhaps the Creator, who seemed to have turned his back on them, would finally free them from their torment. But Job, covered in sores and overcome with grief, looked up and replied firmly, "You speak like one of the foolish women. Shall we receive good at the hand of God and not also evil?" He did not insult her. He did not shout. He simply reaffirmed her faith. Because for Job, God was not only the giver of blessings, but also sovereign over all, including suffering. News of Job's suffering spread like wildfire in the wilderness. But then 3 figures appeared in the distance. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, Job's friends, had traveled from their homeland to comfort him. Yet when they arrived and saw him, they stopped in shock. This thin, disfigured, unrecognizable man could hardly be compared to the friend they had known. The scene was devastating. In a gesture of mourning and solidarity, they tore their clothes, threw dust on their heads, and sat on the ground beside Job. But what they did next was even more remarkable. They remained silent for 7 days and 7 nights. Not a word was spoken, for they realized that their grief was too great for any human consolation. But when Job finally broke his silence, his grief turned into sharp words. "Cursed be the day I was born. Why did I not die when I came out of the womb?" What began as a visit of compassion soon turned into a courtroom. Eliphaz, the eldest, insinuated that Job must have sinned to deserve such punishment. Bildad, cold and direct, said that his sons died because they deserved it. Zophar, the most ruthless, claimed that Job must be hiding something terrible and that God was even showing him mercy. The visit that was supposed to bring comfort became an even greater burden. And then, when it seemed that there was no more hope, God appeared. Out of the whirlwind, the Creator spoke. He brought no explanations, no apologies, but revealed his greatness. Faced with the divine majesty, Job realized that there was something much greater than his pain. Humbly, he declared, "I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes have seen you." It was in this moment of surrender that the turning point happened. God ordered Job's friends, who had so accused him, to bring sacrifices and ask Job to pray for them. Even after everything, Job forgave them and prayed. And then something extraordinary happened. God restored Job's fortunes. His wounds healed, his skin was renewed, and the pain was replaced by vigor. He got back on his feet, now stronger than before. But God didn't just heal him. He restored twice as much as Job had lost. New flocks came, larger and more numerous. Friends and relatives came, bringing gifts and honor. And finally, new children came. 7 sons and 3 daughters, the most beautiful in the land. Job lived another 140 years, saw his descendants to the 4th generation, and died full of days. His story did not end in pain, but in victory. Job's story is not just about suffering, it is about faith that endures and a God who restores beyond imagination.